Welcome to Ruin a Bad Guy's Day Radio Network. Hi, I'm Skip Myers, reporting on the Catch of the Day, where we like to highlight newsworthy stories where you help law enforcement ruin a bad guy's day. Today's Catch of the Day comes from StarTelegram.com. Thousands of credit cards potentially compromised in a hotel room scheme, police say. Reporting from Dallas, thousands of credit cards were potentially compromised in a hotel room purchasing scheme worth $250,000, according to federal court documents. According to the criminal complaint, which was unsealed last week, investigators in Dallas began looking into suspicious hotel purchases made by Kayla Klutts and Otis Edwards in late August. The pair would rent one or two rooms in different hotels in Dallas, Fort Worth, and other areas in Texas, and then sub-rent the room to other people at lower fees, the document says. But Klutts is accused of buying those rooms with credit card numbers she bought from a carding network. The network, police say, was a place where online people would buy and sell credit card numbers. Edwards told investigators that they would use altered credit cards to purchase the rooms. He made about $250,000 in fraudulent charges since March or April, the document says. In September, investigators contacted potential victims to ask if those people gave Klutts and Edwards permission to use their cards. At least one person said no. On October 11th, investigators found that Klutts and Edwards were at a hotel in Carrollton and met them at their room. They confronted the pair about the scheme, and Edwards gave them 5 sheets of paper containing about 69 credit card numbers with various expiration dates and names of other people, the document says. According to that same interview, Edwards later handed investigators a notepad with more than 400 written credit card numbers on them. He also gave investigators 5 altered credit cards, the document says. The investigation continued into November just recently, and investigators found more fraudulent credit cards. To date, investigators have determined that Edwards and Klutts were in possession of approximately 1,200 credit card numbers. The complaint doesn't give details of the locations of the potential victims. Hey everyone, Skip Myers here again. This is a great case involving carding and carders, and a lot of people don't understand what carding is. And it's a really widespread problem. You know, the rise of state-sponsored and criminal enterprise hacking and credit card fraud has become a very widespread problem across the whole world, and is often not reported by individuals and normal private citizens. You know, while most fraud managers allocate a lot of resources to fight typical online fraud, account takeover, or friendly fraud, or synthetic fraud, you know, this kind of information or kind of fraud actually goes overlooked. You know, a lot of times the resources that we have to identify and prevent obvious online fraud like this is an afterthought. You know, and because it's an afterthought, and because we don't educate ourselves and make those around us that are fraud experts more aware of the potential of the widespread problem with carding, fraudsters will exploit this, and they'll use our operational failures and lack of awareness, you know, at our organization against us. And they use this to circumvent our normal fraud detection solutions. So what's so important is that we understand to, you know, really take this information and apply it to our fraud solution, you know, in our environment. You know, what kind of problems are we experiencing, and are we really analyzing through our fraud solution, our fraud detection programs, really what's going on? I mean, do we really have a layered design to analyze and look at the kind of fraud or kind of chargebacks that is occurring within your organization? And so that brings me to actually what carding is. And there's a few definitions out there, and I'd like to share that with a lot of you, but I wonder how many of y'all really thought about what carding is, or what a carder is. What do they do for a living? And obviously you probably know it's a fraudulent type of living. So basically carding refers not only to payment card-based fraud, but is also a range of related activities and services that are fraudulent related. Carding is a term describing the trafficking of credit cards, bank accounts, and other personal information online, as well as related fraud services. So activities involving that kind of information also encompasses a procurement of those certain personal details. And sometimes it also involves money laundering techniques. There's a lot of modern carding sites that are out there right now, and a lot of them are not on the dark web anymore. They're actually out there on the internet, and they're described as full service commercial companies. A little scary. Another definition out there is that carding is a form of credit card fraud in which a stolen credit card is used to charge prepaid cards. Carding typically involves the holder of a stolen credit card purchasing store-branded gift cards, which then can be sold to others or used to purchase other goods that can be sold for cash. So again, another form of money laundering, or another form of changing the stolen information into cash for which the fraudsters can use. So credit card thieves who are involved in this type of fraud are called carders. That's what they're called. That's what they're called in the community. And there's a great many of different methods used by the fraudsters to acquire credit cards and different financial and personal information. And some of the earliest known carding methods have also included trashing or dumpster diving. We used to call it years ago when I was a criminal investigator, and dumpster diving or trashing through trash cans in neighborhoods or dumpsters in the back of businesses is a search for financial data. And the other form, which isn't very sophisticated either, is bad guys who steal mail from mailboxes, raiding the mailboxes and then working with insiders maybe at the Postal Service. That's where some bank card numbers can, a lot of times, if they don't have the whole number, can semi-automatically be generated based on a known sequence of BIN numbers via a BIN attack that carders use with different forms of bad guy technology. So the carders might attempt a distributed guessing attack to discover valid numbers. And again, this is when they have some partial information by submitting numbers across a high number of different websites all at the same time. So they're hitting all these different sites, or even your site, all at once. A lot of times with scripts or pre-scripted bots that are hitting your site all at the same time to see how vulnerable your site is. And a lot of times they're very successful because there's still so many websites that do not have an enterprise level fraud solution that can detect the velocity of transactions or detect fraudulent behavior being transacted on your site. So today, again, so there's various different kinds of methodologies that include skimmers at ATMs, hacking various websites and payment processing sites. Sometimes they intercept credit card data at the point of sale. In the previous podcast, we talked about how a lot of the hackers will compromise your information through a mobile device that isn't secure, through an unsecured Wi-Fi hotspot or Bluetooth connection, all with the eye towards stealing your financial data for their own personal gain. So one of the oldest tricks in the book, some of you guys may have had this happen to you. If you ever stayed at a hotel, get a funny phone call in the middle of the night. Bad guys sometimes will randomly call hotel room phones asking the guests to confirm their credit card details. Again, this is part of like social engineering. You'll get a phone call in the middle of the night, say, hey, this is Skip. I'm at the front desk. Your credit card didn't swipe correctly. Can you take a couple minutes and give me your credit card information? I want to make sure that we handle the payment for your room in a quick and timely fashion. And a lot of people fall for that trap. And it's one that's used today and has been used for several years very successfully. So with this information that the bad guys have, I mean, all this stolen data, a lot of times the carding sites and the carders will bundle this information, your personal information, and they'll bundle it, what they call like a base or first-hand base information. So if the seller participated sometimes in the theft themselves, resellers may also buy packs or dumps from multiple sources, which is stolen identities, of course. And so ultimately, the data is sold on the dark net web or the dark net markets in other carding sites on the internet. And sometimes some of these sites and forums, they're called CVV shops. They specialize in stolen credit cards and stolen personal information. A lot of times, unfortunately, teenagers who spend a lot of time on the web get involved in such fraud by using card detail, this certain kind of information to order pizza, which is crazy, and are often caught very quickly. On a more sophisticated level of some of these sites, these individual dumps of stolen information are sometimes purchased by zip code. I mean, because certain zip codes will show the fraudster a certain affluent area, for instance. So in a certain area of a metropolitan area, maybe that they're targeting. So, sometimes when they do that, is to avoid, as well as alerting certain banks and certain things about their misuse. And so what happens is the bad guys use certain software and automatic checker services to perform a validation that's en masse in order to quickly check to see if a card is good or bad, or whether or not it's being blocked. A lot of times the bad guys will advertise these dumps of stolen data based on a valid type algorithm or information. So, if I'm buying this information, I want to know it's legit and I can use it, right? I'm a bad guy, I'm stealing my money. I want to make sure that the product I'm receiving actually works. So there's certain coding within the bad guy network that, hey, here's a valid rate based on the estimates of this information. Hey, this is going to be good info. So a lot of times the stolen information or the cards that they have compromised that have with a greater value of say 90% or so, command much higher prices than you can imagine. So, if you're a fraudster, you're going to probably pay a premium for information that is good, or that has maybe a stolen personal information that has a high credit limit. Those things come into factor. I mean, this is a business. And so the bad guys know that, and the recipients or the people that are buying this information want a quality product. Kind of scary. So full identity information, full identity being that I got your first name and your last name, your social security number, your date of birth, your address. They call that a FULZ, FULLZ. And that on the dark web, I mean, that's another selling feature. If I'm selling a full package piece of identity on someone, that I can charge a higher price. You can imagine why that would be important to the not just the seller, but the recipient that's buying those goods. So the fraudulent vendors, basically, these people are also called rippers. So this is kind of crazy. So rippers are vendors basically who take the buyer or this other bad guy's money, and they never really deliver it in person. Obviously, there's a high risk to that, and a lot of this information is provided back and forth as a communication via different types of forums on the dark web, or forums not always on the dark web. It could be on the internet, disguised as other types of forums. But there is basically a store-based feedback system where the bad guys can communicate somewhat confidentially, and a lot of times is through a strict site invitation of a bad guy's or referral policy. So if I'm a bad guy, I'm going to refer another bad guy to your forum. So a lot of those carding forums, again, like I said, exist on the internet, but a lot of them exist on the dark web only. And a lot of times they're protected via different kind of cloud type features out there on the internet to kind of safeguard their privacy. So a lot of times then the funds from the stolen cards themselves are cashed out. And again, this is a money laundering type scenario. They're cashed out by buying prepaid cards. So Everyone's seen those, or at most major retailers. There's a prepaid Visa cards and MasterCards, American Express. They also use the stolen cards themselves to cash out and buy gift cards. Gift cards are a dime a dozen now. Any kind of retailer or restaurant's got their own private label type of gift card. And then they use these prepaid cards or gift cards then through reshipping goods through, we've been calling these people mules forever, where use another party, third party bad guy to go get the goods or then resell the goods through other online markets like Amazon or eBay, or heck, even some sort of other website that looks legitimate. And again, there's a lot of freight forwarders and reshipping services that luckily have been come under a lot more scrutiny from law enforcement, and a lot of retailers have educated their fraud teams to really look more closely toward freight forwarders and reshipping services, because those are some areas where bad guys really like to use to keep the anonymity of what they're doing to be as secret as possible. So a lot of this too is hidden from most fraud solutions, because the bad guys will use hacked computers to configure them with a SOX type proxy. So a SOX type proxy enables the bad guy to optimize acceptance from different payment processors. Well, and that's because a SOX, you guys can look this up. A SOX basically stands for a socket secure, SOC 5, SOC S, but is an internet protocol that allows a client or customer and server traffic to pass through a proxy server, so that your real IP is hidden and the proxy IP is reflected from basic programs that really show where your transaction is coming from. In other words, a bad guy could be in Southeast Asia and using a SOX and pretty much make a transaction on a US-based website. And although he's in Southeast Asia, your website may not be able to see that. It will see that the bad guy's actually in Dallas, Texas, when in fact he's in Southeast Asia. So it's an attempt to fool any fraud prevention tools that your website may have. So what's important about this to understand that this is useful for carding, because the carder wants to use that credit card holder's location while transacting this fraudulent order. So if the bad guy's in Southeast Asia and he just stole a card holder's information who resides in Dallas, Texas, he's going to want to use the IP information of that card holder's, say, ship to address or bill to address, so that it kind of circumvents any fraud prevention tools your website may have. So the bad guys, they can purchase these different kinds of SOCs, and actually they can configure their systems to be set up to use SOCs to circumvent any fraud prevention tools that you have. Now, most high-level enterprise-level fraud solution providers have tools within their software to detect people that are trying to hide their IP address or use proxies. And those services help alert you as the fraud manager as a potential high-risk transaction, because why would someone who's legitimate really want to hide their IP address or use a SOX-based software to circumvent the system in an attempt to hide really where they're ordering your products from? So those are some features that can be input into your business rules, maybe placed into a manual review, so you have a chance to look into it much further. What's interesting too is part of the carding network is that they communicate with one another with using things called RDP, or remote desktop protocol. And RDP allows one computer to connect to another computer within the same network. And this is, I'm not making this up, this is actually was developed by Microsoft. And pretty much the carders use it to connect to computers of the geolocation of the person whose credit carder they want to use. So it's just like what I talked about before. It's why would you want to use a location or geolocation that's not even in the same country of the cardholder's information you just stole. So again, that's all about the bad guys understanding basic fraud prevention tools that a lot of your companies or that we have today, and that's their way of circumventing those fraud prevention techniques. So again, it's used for their safety and security. It's less risk for them, and they stay anonymous. That's very important to understand too. So again, all this is about creating space between the carder or the fraudster and you. The greater the distance, the less risk it is for them. Lastly, I want to talk about the drop or ship to location. So the drop is the address that the carder uses for the shipping address in the carding process. If a bad guy's carding with a U.S. card, then he uses a USA address as a shipping address. And most times, knowing that, most websites will ship that order with no problem. So the shipping and the order is all done successfully because of that, because the bad guys know how these systems work, and they believe it's safe and secure for them. And again, they remain anonymous. And this is just another way of how the bad guys have learned and evolved through the years in understanding our fraud solutions that we currently have. So if your company currently has an in-house or a legacy system, an old system that's really not up to date, bad guys will take advantage of that. They understand the limitations of a home-built fraud solution, and most enterprise-level companies have moved on from legacy systems to a full package fraud solution, whereas the fraud solution provider can provide the merchant with device fingerprinting. Gives me information where I can understand what device was used during that transaction. So I know through device fingerprinting, this device is a tablet or a phone or a desktop. It also helps me understand the geolocation because, again, what we said earlier, it's important to understand if I have a fraudster or using a high-level fraud solution provider that gives me information of a transaction that originated from Southeast Asia. But in this particular transaction, there's evidence that shows that this transaction is involved with someone who's hiding their geolocation or hiding their IP address. These are high-risk factors for me. So an enterprise-level fraud solution provider can give you these types of details. And again, setting up business rules yourself in conjunction with these sophisticated algorithms used by your fraud solution provider with showing velocity or link analysis. For instance, you have an email address that's linked to maybe 20 different credit card numbers being shipped to the same ship-to address with a transaction connected to an individual that's trying to hide their IP address. Those are important elements of a transaction for a fraud manager to understand whether or not this is a transaction you want to approve, you want to manually review, or should I just auto decline it? It's not worth my time because there's so many risk factors involved there. You're pretty sure that this is going to be a fraudulent order if accepted. So we touched on carding, we touched on the catch of the day, but understand a lot of these biggest cases you read about and the news sources talk about, well, this is part of a carding network. The carding network is a much larger criminal enterprise. So these bad guys are out there, using your stolen information to buy goods or services. In this case, it was the hotel rooms. And, I'm sure you guys caught on to that. So the bad guy was renting these hotel rooms to other probably bad guys. So he was getting money, probably cash, from the bad guys that are sub-renting the hotel rooms. But the hotel rooms that the bad guy originally reserved were reserved with stolen credit cards. So he wasn't out any money whatsoever. And probably the guys that he got to sub-rent the hotel room, those are the guys that were probably face-to-face with law enforcement. So we're going to continue this discussion at another podcast, dive a little bit more deeper into actually how carders operate, the larger network and the criminal enterprise, and how today that the international community of hackers and credit card thieves are alive and well. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and I hope you have a chance to ruin a bad guy's day. Thank you, everyone.